To celebrate the end of the 2023 regular season, we've compiled 23 hot takes that'll launch you out of your seat and have you flaming us up in the comments.
The first hot take on the list is that LeBron James' scoring record will never be broken. As everybody knows, LeBron had recently just passed Kareem for the all-time points leader in the NBA, and despite a few weeks of celebration following the event, people for the most part have already moved on without there seeming to be a true appreciation for how historic of a record this one might be, considering the fact there doesn't really appear to be a player that's going to even come close to this one for a very long time. Despite the crazy amount of talent in this league currently with players like Jason Tatum and Luka Doncic, who are both having insane offensive production over the last few seasons, but when you compare most of these players to LeBron, they hardly stack up to the total outpouring of buckets LeBron was giving early on in his career. As for the first 5 seasons, LeBron was averaging a total of 2,138 points a season. And although there is a massive increase in offense since then, there is really only a handful of players that have even surpassed that 2,000 point benchmark by their 5th season. With Tatum reaching that point last season while being in his 5th year, and Luka still not managing to crack that 2,000 point season. Although there is a very strong chance he's able to do it this year, but even if he does, these players would also need to somehow find the longevity to continue that for at least 20 seasons, as every player that has cracked that 30,000 point benchmark has put in at least 20 years, aside from Michael Jordan, Wilt Chamberlain, and Karl Malone, who'd played 19 years. Maybe I should Google Karl Malone 13 to understand why I would randomly associate those two things. But anyways, given the amount of injuries players have been stacking up with the increased pace of the game, it's hard to see how a lot of these players will manage to do so.
Next hot take, Zion Williamson is going nowhere in his career. We've already made a video about this, which you can watch here. However, long story short, Zion is too fat to be an NBA player without destroying his body, especially with his explosive playstyle and 50+ inch vert, which he isn't shy to use. He could always just lose the weight. However, the real problem lies in that his weight gives him a huge advantage, as he's a freak athlete speeding cannonball with a lower center of gravity than most guys his size. This is, of course, when he can actually play the odd quarter of a season. The facts are, if he loses the weight, he becomes a different player, no longer capable of charging in like a bull in a china shop with no one wanting to get in his way. This will surely make him a shell of his former self. So unfortunately for Zion, it's either play a quarter of a season for the rest of his life, or lose weight and probably not be an all-star anymore.
Another hot take is that Wembanyama might be too weak for the NBA. This one isn't that hot of a take, as there has been legitimate questions toward Victor's NBA readiness. As the league becomes more international, it's become harder to scout some of these players, who oftentimes are already going up against grown men in European leagues, which some may think makes the scouting process easier, but it's hard to compare the game in the NBA to the one played in the Euro leagues and Victor's own LNB league, as they are different styles of the game. Luka's already let us know that it's easier to score in the NBA than the Europe leagues, and he's been able to prove it pretty easily, and with Victor averaging 22.2 points currently, it should be a safe assessment that he'll still be able to get his 20 a game. But there are questions on how Victor's game will be able to translate when there are stronger and more physical bodies to go up against, and if he will still be that deterrent in the paint as he's been in France. And the truth about Wemby is there's already evidence of him being bullied on the court, as just recently in a game against
Lyon, Villeurbanne,
Wemby struggled against his matchup Yusuf Fall, being held to only 15 points on pretty terrible shooting while being tossed around on box out and low post work. It's also worth mentioning that the 15-point benchmark is something he hasn't been able to break while going up against Yusuf. So this may be a sign that there is a type of player that can be used as a Wemby stopper. Victor, however, did do a lot of amazing things in that game. It's clear that his defense is elite, as his length makes him a scary rim protector, while also having the capability of closing out on the perimeter in the snap of a finger. So it will be interesting to see how he matches up in the NBA.
Next hot take, the OKC Thunder will not only make the playoffs next year, but will make the second round. This team already has so much potential. First of all, they have SGA performing at an elite level, as well as Josh Giddey looking very capable of taking that third-year leap and really developing into a star player. These two definitely have a bright future, but it gets really interesting when you think about throwing Chet Holmgren into the mix. As of right now, the second pick of the 2022 draft is still unproven at the NBA level due to his unlucky pre-debut season injury. However, his mix of skill, height, and agility is reminding a lot of people of a young Kevin Durant. If he really does pan out to be even 3/4 of KD, the Thunder are looking extremely deadly next year.
The next hot take on the list is that Josh Giddey might be the most underrated rookie within the last 5 years. With all of the insane amount of talent that has been flooded in the league over the past couple seasons, it's hard to really keep track of all these young players. But Giddey going under the radar for this long is almost criminal. Along with Shea, he's helped bring this overperforming OKC team to 7th in the West, and a pretty good shot at making a run for the play-ins. But the impact that Josh Giddey is bringing to this team is now being underrated, as he doesn't put up these insane 40-point games that SGA has been stacking up, or isn't having the crazy mid-season boost that players like Jalen Williams has been seeing. So there's a lot of times that his efforts go unnoticed. But when you look at his current per 36 this year, he's stacking up to be a 20, 10, and 7 player. And looking deeper into the change of advanced analytics from this year to last season, there's a major jump in win shares going from 0.4 last year to now 3.3. One of the biggest knocks against Giddey is his poor shooting, but this is something you can see him slowly start to develop. And it should also be noted that effective field goal percentage is the only stat on the floor that doesn't improve for his team when he's on the court versus on the bench. But honestly, scoring isn't the biggest way Giddey impacts the game anyways, as he's already an elite playmaker as well as having the size to really make an impact on the glass. So it should be really interesting to see how this team looks when Chet is finally healthy, if this is how far they can make it with the current team that they have.
Next hot take. Now that Brittany Griner is hardened by prison, she could finally beat Boogie in a 1v1. Everybody knows to make it out of a Russian prison alive, you gotta have that dog in you. And you can bet BG42 has been hooping on the frozen over courts of a Siberian prison against Russia's finest. Just kidding. Hey, it would make a killer storyline though.
The next hot take on the list is around Anthony Davis getting a lot of flack for being softer than Soapstone, which at times is definitely warranted, but the truth is he's not the worst of the bunch, as players like KD and Kawhi have both missed more games over the past 4 seasons. With AD playing a total of 184 games, KD at 10 less with 174, and Kawhi only lacing up for 153 games since 2019. A lot of people of course already make noise about the fact that Kawhi is always a back-to-back away from load management, but this still seems to fall short of the major criticism AD gets. As when you look at it objectively with hindsight, Kawhi really did finesse the Clippers. After he had led the Raptors to chip, he was the hottest free agent over the last few seasons, and that commanded a lot of power that he used to bring in Paul George. And since then, the Clippers have had little to show success-wise, besides ridding the organization of Doc Rivers, which admittedly is a pretty big W at the end of the day, but ultimately, if Kawhi can't manage to stay on the floor, this will all be for nothing. But moving on to KD, who was in a similar situation as Kawhi, joining up with an all-star on the second-rate team in that town, but of course that super team broke apart after not seeing any success as well, with some of the reasons for this lack of success being due to KD being a certified glass panel. But of course in KD and Kawhi's situation, their all-star teammates aren't perfect either, as the duo in LA have only been able to play 113 games together, and now with Paul George recently having a pretty rough leg injury, this number doesn't look to increase anytime soon. And in KD's case, it's even worse, with only a total of 74 games played together. But in both scenarios, the main stars are ultimately out for more games for injuries. I mean, at this point, KD has been out so frequently that he hasn't even played LeBron since the 2018 Christmas Day game. And not to mention the fact that the Warriors still haven't been able to show KD their tribute video due to the fact that he hasn't laced up in the Bay since leaving the team. So at the end of the day, yes, AD might be made of glass, but that would mean KD and Kawhi literally have spider webs for bones.
Next hot take, the Sacramento Kings are regular season warriors who will fail in the playoffs. The Kings have looked good this year, and that's really saying something, considering for the past 2 decades, the Kings have been one of the most depressing teams in the league. Actually, the most depressing team. They have the longest playoff drought of all time coming into this season. Currently, the Kings are 3rd seed in a stacked Western Conference, and although that could change, they're currently 5 wins ahead of the 4th seeded Clippers. The problem for me is that De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis have yet to prove themselves in the playoffs, and I think we all know that there have been a number of regular season teams that fizzle out in the playoffs year after year. Looking at you, Go Bears Jazz. If Fox and Sabonis happen to match up against someone like Luka Doncic or Steph Curry, both of which have pretty good odds to be playing the Kings come playoffs, will it really be enough? Fox has monster clutch numbers, but again, it's in the regular season. Is he going to be Hardened, or is he actually going to make a difference in the playoffs?
The 9th hot take on our list is that the 2018 draft will go down as one of the best draft years in NBA history. When people talk about historic draft years, it's usually unanimously agreed that the 1984 draft is one of, if not the best draft year in history of the NBA. Seeing Hall of Fame talent such as Hakeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, John Stockton, and many more All-Stars from that era. But when all said and done, there's a very good chance that the 2018 draft will go down in history as one of the most insane drafts in the history of the league. With players such as Luka, Trey, DeAndre Ayton, SGA, Mikal Bridges, Miles Bridges, with even players like Jalen Brunson being a second-round pick. And now that we're only 5 years removed from that draft, there's already been 4 All-Stars, with 2 members of that class, Luka and SGA, currently within the top 5 points per game for this season. And even Trae Young just squeaking into the top 10. And with most of these players just entering their peak, it's been crazy to see how quick they've been able to take over this league.
Next hot take. If Marvin Bagley was drafted lower, he would have been a very solid player by now. Everybody knows the story of Bagley. Drafted in 2018 before Luka Doncic, Jaren Jackson Jr., Trae Young, SGA, pre-charges Miles Bridges, the list really goes on. As 2018 is looking like one of the most stacked draft classes, period. Unfortunately for Bagley, it seems the pressure of performing alongside some of these monsters who came out of that draft may have stunted Bagley's development and motivation to be a top player. We all know he has it in him. We see it in tiny flashes during a certain week here and there. However, Bagley was always meant to be a development project, and with the league clowning on him for not quite being at the level of some of these future Hall of Famers drafted just below him, it's hard to blame Bagley for just surrendering to fate, riding pine, still collecting millions, and living a great life nonetheless. Hey, maybe Detroit may even be the perfect environment for his growth. Most players have a pretty long career if they can defend and catch lobs.
The next hot take on this list is that three-peats in this era are impossible. The last time that we've seen a three-peat in the NBA was Kobe and Shaq's Lakers in 99-02. Since then, we've seen teams go back-to-back like the Warriors, who fell short of a three-peat in 2019, and the Heat, who also went back-to-back in 2012 and 2013, but couldn't get it done in 2014. And when looking back at the Warriors in 2019, who were the biggest threat in the league after beating the Cavs 2 years in a row and were clearly worn down from those long 3 seasons, and it had finally struck both Klay and KD in the finals against Toronto, making an already tough series even harder as they weren't able to get it done and ultimately lost to the Raptors in 6, who at the time was also being led by a player who famously has the need to load manage. Which kinda states the obvious, that the increase of play and pace has made it a lot harder for players to stay on the court for the full 82 games, while going on to give that 110% for multiple 7-game series, only to have that shortened offseason having less time to prepare to do the same thing all over again for the next 2 seasons. Which is made a lot harder now given the insane amount of talent that is spread out across the entire league, making it harder for there to be a clear frontrunner at the beginning of any season.
Next hot take. Super team eras are underappreciated. Don't get me wrong, after the LeBron versus Golden State era, it is very good to see some new teams stepping up to the plate. To me, however, these past few finals have been so boring. I just didn't care as much as I did when watching the multi-year storylines of the Cavs or Warriors. Unfortunately, the Cavs team fell apart pretty quickly, but a few of those years were crazy. Also, when you think back in NBA history, what do you think of? Probably the Jordan Bulls dynasty, maybe the Showtime Lakers versus Birds Celtics? If you're in a retirement home watching this, you might be thinking of Bill Russell and the Celtics going huge for an entire decade. What do all of these eras have in common? 1 or 2 dominant teams that were unstoppable. I guarantee you, in 10 years, nobody will remember that time the Phoenix Suns matched up against the Milwaukee Bucks in the finals.
The next hot take on the list is that the GOAT debate will never have a real answer, and at a certain point is really just opinion based on who you think is more important to the game. At this point, debating over the greatest player of all time has dissolved to a low form of content that networks use whenever they run out of headlining news to talk about. This is all made easier due to the fact that there's no real metric to determine who the greatest player is, and so many other metrics to determine aspects of a player's greatness and different ways to manipulate those and make it seem as though another player might be overrated. Which is why, at a certain point, the debate boils down to a person's single opinion to who they think the best player of all time is, based on what they deem to be the most important parts of the game, with many people at least singling it down to Michael Jordan or LeBron. And the truth is, both of these players have a very strong case for being the GOAT, as well as a handful of players that honestly I wouldn't really be mad with either. But at the end of the day, the debate is almost like talking about how a steak should be cooked. A lot of people agree that there's one right answer, but at the end of the day, it's always going to be about preference.
Next hot take. Alperen Şengün is the future of the Rockets. Watching Rockets games for the past 2 years has been very frustrating. Ever since Şengün touched the court, it's very evident that he has an advanced basketball IQ for his age, seeming to make the right play, or at least try to, most of the time. He's also pretty versatile, being able to score, pass, rebound, defend, and even bring it out to the 3 line occasionally. The basketball IQ mixed with these skills are leading a lot of people to compare Şengün to a baby Jokic. Despite this, Şengün seems to be nowhere close to getting the keys to the team. If you watch the Rockets, you'll see Şengün constantly trying to hustle and make the right play, just for Jalen Green to take some boneheaded contested shot 10 seconds into the shot clock and blow the possession. Yes, Jalen Green and KPJ look promising, and I do like both players, but neither have shown that they could really be that guy to lead a team. Going into next season, the Rockets' best move would be to give Şengün more minutes, more touches, and try to empower him as some sort of locker room leader or presence.
The 15th take on this list is that the 76ers might have the worst rookie development in the entire league. There's a lot of teams that are known for their lack of scouting or rookie development, with the one team that immediately pops into people's heads being the Sacramento Kings, as they've had 11 total lottery picks since their last playoff appearance in 2006, with a lot of those picks coming to the league and underperforming. But honestly, the Kings might be getting an unfair reputation, because if you look really closely into the numbers, there is another team that has managed to see success, despite the fact that a lot of their first round picks have seen little to no success while on the team. And the organization that I'm talking about is the Philadelphia 76ers, who've had pretty unfortunate draft day luck going all the way back to 2013, when they should also ring true for Philly fans that are all too familiar with the Markelle Fultz story. But now that Fultz is in Orlando, he's managing to bring back some of his former self to really explode in the second half of this season. And all of this without even mentioning debatably the 76ers' worst developed player, Ben Simmons, who has had his entire psyche shook by Coach Doc Rivers and the organization, who hung Ben out to dry in the public eye rather than handle it internally like many other organizations would have done. Of course, Philly has still seen some success without any player development, which is still entirely possible. I mean, the Lakers have built a world-renowned franchise without a shred of rookie development, instead choosing to trade to bring in talent in-house. But for teams looking to build through the draft, I would suggest doing the exact opposite of what Philly has been able to do with their rookies.
Next hot take. The Phoenix Suns will fizzle out fast in the 2023 playoffs. I don't think I have to say too much about this one. KD can't stay on the court, Chris Paul is 78 years old, everybody on the team hates Ayton, and Booker's been overrated as hell ever since he dropped 70 one time. Of course, if they are going to win, this is probably their year. But man, I just don't trust any of these guys to deliver at this point.
The next hot take on this list is that there's a very easy pathway for Ben Simmons' return to success. Now, I know the fun and cool thing to do lately is to rag on Ben Simmons, as even here at the Ballbaggers, we've been on record unfairly attacking this man when there's actually a lot of upside to Ben that a lot of people aren't noticing. An upside that might just unlock his true potential and make a comeback as the true MVP he's determined to be. As there's been recent reports, and was just confirmed by a Woj bomb, that the Shanghai Sharks have opened up a position for equipment manager, and with Ben's extensive knowledge of street clothes, I'm sure this is a role Ben will finally be able to thrive in.
Next hot take. With Eric Bledsoe and Michael Beasley, the Shanghai Sharks are looking to dominate the CBA this year, and it won't be close. Nah, I'm just kidding. I don't really care about the CBA. On to the next one.
The 19th hot take on this list is that just about anyone in this league can average 20 if given the chance. We've seen over the last few seasons that players have been able to reach that coveted 20-point benchmark with the increase of offense that's been happening over the league over the past few seasons. With guards such as Colin Sexton and Terry Rozier managing this feat for a season without really being an elite offensive player when compared to some of the talent averaging 20 in the 2000s era. But given the loosening of fouls being called on offensive players and the increased challenge of guarding players on the perimeter, it's left the league exposed in certain areas that have made it much easier for guards to get an increase in scoring. As for most of the time, if they can beat their man on the perimeter, there's little to no drop coverage that can really make an effect. which is why it's been easier for guards in general to really get going, especially when a lot of these dudes at one point or another in their career were the best player and scorer on their team, with one of the perfect examples of this being Patrick Beverley, who many people didn't know was an offensive machine in high school, averaging 37.3 a game. But looking at the way he plays the game now, it would be very hard to tell. But when these players are placed into that role where they are given the green light, they can get you their 20. Although it might not be on a winning team, but they'll still get theirs.
Next hot take. Maxing Pascal Siakam was one of the worst decisions ever made by the Raptors. Now, we've already made a video gassing up Pascal Siakam, but it was a flop anyway, so it's mask off time. Pascal Siakam never deserved the max and will never deserve the max. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, as he greatly contributed to the championship run of the Raptors in 2019, and maxing him was likely a thank you from the team, as he was one of the most underpaid members of that Raptors squad. However, as the standalone first option of a directionless Raptors team, he's clearly not bringing the team anywhere. He clearly struggles as a first option, as while he's been averaging career high stats this year, the Raptors are only 9th in the East, which is very telling. If Embiid or Jokic, who are currently making around the same salary, were in Siakam's shoes, would they be 9th in the East? I know those players are extreme examples, however, they're worlds apart from Siakam's skill level, so it has to be said. Pascal is the type of guy who works best as a second or probably even third option to a team with high aspirations. He's got a high motor, isn't afraid of making hustle plays, and is always good at filling an empty lane for an easy bucket. When he's the first option though, he spin moves straight into a defender and loses the ball. Is it $20 million a year money? Sure. Is it max money? No.
The next take on this list is that media darling defenders are pretty overrated. We've recently done a video covering Rudy Gobert and how he's more than a little overrated as a defender, which is something that is kind of being exposed this year in Minnesota, as he's been struggling to contain many centers while also seeing a large dip in his rim protection. And even recently in a game against the Raptors, Jakob Poeltl, who isn't the most insane offensive rebounder, was able to snag up 5 total offensive boards, while also managing to maintain his season average 14 points, doing so efficiently, knocking down 7 out of 8 of his attempts. But Rudy's not the only media darling defender that's been underperforming, while still being regarded as one of the best in the league. Another one of those players would be the former Defensive Player of the Year Marcus Smart, who despite winning the award last year, has pretty much completely regressed, with his teammate Derek White at times looking like the more comparable defender. As just recently in a game against the Trailblazers, he was switched on and off of Dame with little to no effect, as Dame was still able to drop 41 while managing to go to the foul line for 14 attempts, which is far from what I would consider to be a solid defensive game. But I mean, hey, that's Dame Lillard, who's a league vet and made a name for himself being one of the best offensive players in the league. It's not like Marcus would let a third-year player almost drop, let's say, 30 on him the night before while shooting 50% from the field and 63% from 3, right? Well, okay, maybe he would, but this wouldn't be so bizarre if there wasn't a lot more capable defensive players that do genuinely make it harder on players to get a basket that don't get the same love, like Lou Dort or Jared Allen. While other players getting completely disrespected, like Luka Doncic being labeled a pylon on defense, while actually progressing pretty well on that end of the floor. The narratives, for the most part, have run wild in the media over a lot of these awards, but to me, it seems that a Defensive Player of the Year at this point is the most detached from reality.
Next hot take. Giannis is a serial offensive fouler. Before I say anything about Giannis, he's absolutely one of, if not the best NBA players out there right now. And what I say wouldn't really change that. However, if you watch Giannis, the guy is charging into the paint with no regard for the well-being of those around him. He's definitely not afraid to go straight into or let the bows fly on people. While this might be very annoying for defenders, I think we can all agree that bringing back a bit of physicality is a nice change from the present, which is severely lacking physicality, given that everybody these days is a 190-pound, 6'7" three-point shooter. I just hope that bigger NBA defenders start going harder on Giannis physically. Maybe like a mini Jordan rules, if you will, to counter his reckless assault on the basket. This will surely raise the tensions of the games. But what can I say? It makes for good TV.
The last hot take for the video is that if Jokic was trying to stat pad on Russell Westbrook's usage, he would be putting up Wilt Chamberlain-like stats. Nikola Jokic has been in the headlines a lot lately, with the MVP race slowly coming to a close. which is usually about the time major networks decide to stir up any type of talking piece to make headlines, with the wildest of those coming from the level-headed Kendrick Perkins, who had recently just put forward the notion that Jokic's MVPs might be a little overrated since Jokic apparently has been getting those MVP nods due to his incessant need to stat pad, completely ignoring the fact that Jokic had won 25 consecutive games when getting a triple-double up until a few games ago. But not only that, when you also consider the fact that Jokic struggles to break into the top 10 for field goal attempts, as well as the fact that Jokic for the past 3 seasons has consistently been at the top of the league for win shares and value over replacement. It's hard to really call what Jokic does on the floor stat padding without ultimately affecting the outcome of the game. But I mean, there is already history of an MVP winning stat padder, like say Russell Westbrook, who many people agree was putting up some pretty empty stats that really didn't help you get the win. And even when you compare minor things like Westbrook's assist to turnover ratio that over his career is still much worse than Jokic's, but especially when you compare Jokic this season to Russ's MVP year. Which is why we say it's very likely that if Jokic was given the 42% usage rate that Russ was given and trying the stat pad, instead of his career high 32% he was able to get last year, he would be putting up some crazy Wilt-like stats. I mean, we did see him average 27, 14, and 8, while dragging a group of guys you could find at LA Fitness to 50 wins. So it should be clear by now that Jokic's stats are the farthest thing from empty stats.
Well, that's the end of the hot take. We really appreciate it that you made it this far into the video, and if you liked the video, consider commenting or liking. If you didn't like it, leave a dislike, and leave a comment flaming us up. Either way, we'll see you next Monday.